We join this program in progress with Pamela Thomas discussing her background.
I had studied African American studies at City College, was fortunate enough to go to West Africa and do a study abroad. So, I was always immersed in Black culture and Black history and everything Black. When I went to school, I thought I was going to be a college professor because I took nothing but Black studies courses. And, it's so unfortunate that, although coming from a family who was very conscious about Blackness, you really don't learn about who you are in your history until you have to pay a ridiculous fee to learn it in higher education. And once that door opened for me, it was like for most young people, it was like, wow, I just didn't know this. So fast forward to meeting Lorene. When I met her, she had this really interesting collection of animation art. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cute. I didn't understand what animation art was, or let alone the purpose of collecting it. But I don't know, one day I just asked this question to her, where are the Black cartoons? Since you are collecting cartoons, where are the Black ones? And, I guess I'll let her speak for herself, but it was almost like, well, I kind of didn't think of that. And then we just ended up going on this crusade of trying to find the original artwork that was used under the camera for all the Black cartoons. And prior to that, I had a small, very, very small collection of Black movie posters. Matter of fact, I collected all of Spike Lee movie posters. And at the time I was involved with someone who said to me, that is so juvenile. Why do you have these posters? So me, like a fool, got rid of all the posters. And then, in collecting with Lorene, the animation art took me back to the days of when I had the Spike Lee collection of movie posters. And one thing led to another. It went from animation art to a few movie posters. And then we ended up going to a Black memorabilia show. And for me, we kind of discovered that there were Black people on coins. And that's when we both saw the George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington $50. And I did not know that, but it brought back memories for me as a kid. My grandparents collected Morgans, and my grandmother had a couple of gold, I think it was a quarter of an ounce, $10 gold coins. But I didn't understand any of that, what that was about. But I made the connection from them being collectors of coins and then taking that and wanting to collect coins that had people of color on it. So anything for me has always been, well, if we're going to collect, it has to be Black. And in doing that, it's because when you look around, and especially if you go to any type of poster show, memorabilia show, we are not the owners of our history. So that was really important for us to take on this project and collect all of this memorabilia. And then one thing led to another. We were former gallery owners, and we actually got affected by 9/11. So we've had to close the gallery, but we had all of this stuff. We got affected by way of the town that we had the gallery in. A lot of people didn't come home from the World Trade Center. So, a lot of foot traffic had ended. A lot of our clientele were affected. So in closing the gallery and trying to work from home, we had all of this stuff. And in my mind, it's like, okay, we're going to have this place that could be a museum. And Lorene was like, no, I'm never doing a brick and mortar again. And so
you said that, Lorene?
At that time, yeah, because you don't realize how much physical labor and art gallery is in terms of moving stuff, and it's a lot. And dealing with a retail space, it was like, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to do this. So yeah, I mean, she'll tell you why we went virtual first instead of going to really try to build a museum. It was like, we got to raise all that money. I don't want to do that. It's like, we can just put this online and, we can just do it that way. So no,
Oh,
I had enough of the, opening a retail space at that time.
yeah,
Yeah. And then, the whole, like she said, 9/11, the whole thing of, you get your space open and, they did construction for, a year. So people could get, it was, everything that could go wrong, culminating in like a terrorist bombing that could
yeah,
happen, open a space. That's kind
yeah,
of, I feel for people who just got their businesses open and this pandemic hit them, because we understand what that's like. It's like you like disaster plan and you have a plan B, plan C, but that was
mhm,
like plan Z that you just didn't think about, that
right,
completely jacks up your ability to, to execute your business the way you thought you were going to be able to. So yeah, I was kind of done at that point. I was like, look, we just need to do something that we can control, that doesn't
uh-huh,
have all the outside, opportunities for disaster to like parachute in and blow up your plans.
yeah.
So, that's how we ended up online. That's
So,
what happened.
so give me a little bit about your background and how you came from there to that point where you said, I'm not doing this again. No more brick and mortar.
Well, my background, I was born in Harlem, lived in Brooklyn, but basically grew up in Rochester, New York. So, mom
Okay.
had settled here after she got out of college and, went to New York for a couple of years and came back. So I grew up in Rochester, and which was an interesting town. But by the time college came around, I was like, I have got to go out and see the world and get out of here, right? I need to go see
Hmm.
bigger and better things, right? So went to
Hmm.
school in Philly and then ended up working in Jersey. And I was, my background is in marketing. I mean, I have always been very interested in Black history. Again, my mom was a huge influence on me. She was an educator. She marched, with the March on Washington, and had
Hmm.
just endured just a lifetime of racism. She, grew up in a small town in upstate New York where, my family was like the only Black family in town. So
Oh,
you can only imagine, just kind of what they went through. So, she did the same thing. She was like, look, I am leaving. I'm not coming back. I'm up out of here. It's like, peace.
yeah.
I'm going to chase bigger, better pastures where there are more Black people and more opportunities. So she kind of, always shared that with me, kind of instilled what it was like growing up under that situation, the racism she endured all her life, and, raised me to be very Black,
Hmm.
very focused on knowing my history, understanding what it meant to be Black, understanding what we had to do from an education perspective, because she was an educator. It was like, you always have to be, smarter, you got to be better, you got to work harder, because that's just.
Hmm.
So, I was raised by that generation of, of black people who have been through that very hard experience.
Yeah.
We're trying to, instill, what you had to do moving forward and how you don't let things, weigh you down and stuff like that. So anyway, but her thing was, as an educator, you have to know your history. I mean, so that is really where I learned Black history from my mom. Not so much
From
in
your
school,
mom.
because we didn't get a
Yeah.
lot of Black history. But I was that kid who then went to this small private school in Rochester and said, "Look, your reading list is trash. I'll be reading the autobiography of Malcolm X." And
Malcolm X.
I said, "Make sure you get the cliff notes because you're gonna have to grade my paper." So it's like that's kind of where I came from. And it's like, if you have a problem with it, call my mama, because she'll explain it to you. But this is what we're gonna do. I'm not reading
Yeah.
that. I'm reading this, and
Yeah.
I'll be reading this set of books over the summer, and y'all need to catch up because this is where we're going, right? So, but yeah, Black history was always my thing. It was always an interest. I went into school and took a business track, went from like liberal arts into business and
Uh-huh.
marketing, stuff like that, but always interested in Black history. Always knew at some point I would kind of come back around to it.
Hmm.
And I was always trying to get all the companies that I work for to
Hmm.
market to the Black audience, and always making a case for here's the products that we consume, and here's why this makes a lot of sense from a bottom line perspective. And child, after a
Hmm.
while, you get kind of tired of having that conversation.
I can understand. What
Yeah.
was your so Pam, what was your background coming in? Was it a liberal arts track, or how did that what was
Liberal
your?
arts. Mine was liberal arts. I majored in African American history and education, but
Okay.
more towards African American history, and not really looking for a specific career path. I just became so involved with learning more about our history that it consumed me.
Got it.
So I went to school really for one thing, but ended up getting consumed because there was so much information that I was learning that I didn't know existed. And, you know, my family was a very Black family too. They came from Sumter, South Carolina, by way of Harlem, ending up in the Bronx. But they were the Negroes that left the South behind, and they were Northerners now. So it was a different type of education that I got from them. You know, the be proper, the speak proper, the sit up straight, that type of thing. It wasn't until my aunt, my mom's sister, she was very Black. She ended up going to City College, and you know, she was the one who kind of opened up the door for me to look at my Blackness from a different perspective. So Saturdays we would watch Gil Noble, Like It Is. You know, and then there was room for me to watch some of the Saturday morning cartoons and Soul Train and things of that nature. But Gil Noble was sitting around in the living room with everyone to get that information. So, you know, after college, it was, again, not a specific career path. I just was consumed with why. You know, why is it like this and not like that? Not having the wherewithal to know within myself, you know, well, maybe you can do something to make those changes. At that time, I was still seeking the why and could not answer those questions for myself. And you know, it took me a couple of years because I went through the Take It to the Streets, the Kente Cloth, all of that, until I guess within myself, I kind of resolved, you know, my own answers to the why. And started looking at our history and our people and our circumstances on a different level. And, you know, understanding that the why is not, why is it this way? Can it be changed? But understanding how the systems are in place for it to be this way. And once, you know, for myself, once I got that, then it seemed like everything started to fall into place for me personally. And I think that was probably one of the reasons why, you know, collecting this history was so significant.
So
especially that time period of the 70s.
So it seemed to be a symbiosis. Then we've got in terms of coming together, you two coming together with this particular vision. What was let me ask you this, either one of you take it. What was the glue that brought the idea of a museum together? And then two, the name, the Museum of UnCut Funk. So what was the glue that brought you two together on this on this idea of a museum? Was it the fact of the gallery, that you had this, you already had a collection, and that, you know, this idea sort of mushroomed out of that? Or was there some other piece that came together that said, yeah, this is it? What, you know,
well,
how did that work through?
By the time we closed the gallery, and I'll be really brief, Lorene, by the time we closed the gallery, we had a lot of stuff, a lot of memorabilia. And in my mind, although I, you know, was actively a part of from the beginning towards the end of the gallery, it just made sense, you know, well, we could do this again. Not really taking the full breadth of how painful it was in opening up a business and dealing with construction, 9/11, closing a business, you know, and everything else following that.
Yeah.
We just do it again. And besides, we've got all of this stuff. And you know, you're meeting people who are collectors, and well, if we're doing it and they're doing it, then there is a market for this, and really not understanding the fine details of what it would take. Just being on the surface of, well, we could do this again. And you know, Lorene gave a lot of pushback about this not having another museum or not having another brick and mortar. And I guess we will always have a debate on who came up with the name. But somehow I want to say I came up with the name.
Is that what you want to say, Pam?
I want to say I came up with it because in my mind, I see myself saying that and presenting it to her. Now, she kind of has a different version of how this took place, but that's my take on it.
All right, let me hear your version, Lorene.
So let me try to answer all those questions, and then let me rebut that last piece. But you know, the glue. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily glue that held it together, or like the one thing that like flipped the switch. It was a process, right? This was an evolution over, you know, and still is a process, an evolution over what's now like 25 years, right? It started with that love of Black history that both of us had, you know, coming at it from different, you know, respects, like, you know, something that, you know, that Pam, you know, specifically studied and kind of built her college experience around, something that I, you know, as I said, was a, you know, a relationship that I had with my mom. I mean, you know, we're upstate New York folks, and, you know, until very recently, you know, what had been told to me was that, you know, we came up through the Underground Railroad. There was always that assumption that because of where we ended up, that's how we, you know, kind of got here, right? So there's, you know, always that history and understanding that, you know, we were kind of connected to, you know, slavery, and, you know, and the desire to understand it more, and the desire to learn that piece of it. Now, you know, very recently come to understand that my folks didn't come up through the Underground Railroad at all. We actually were, you know, slaves on Long Island that were owned by some guy who was a Declaration of Independence signer. So it, you know,
you basically are saying that y'all have been here all the time, kind of thing.
My folks have been here, but, you know, but because of where we ended up, we were definitely you know, married, and, you know, related to people who came up that way. But that was kind of the big thing, because my mom had always, you know, you get these little bits of history that are kind of passed down, and you make assumptions until you have a chance to step back and do the more detailed work. So that was always the fascination, right? So always a love of history, always an understanding of history, a connection to, you know, kind of a part of the country that we lived in. You know, not necessarily, you know, similar to Pam's, where family were coming from South. You know, my family was in upstate New York. But having said that, so I think that's one of the things that was an interest. We were very aware of our Blackness, very much, you know, more on the militant side of things, both of us in our own way. You know, little acts of militance and resistance throughout our life that we could kind of relate to. But, you know, the thing that really did kind of kick this off was that question, man, because, you know, for somebody who values, you know, their Blackness, to hit me with where are the Black cartoons, I was like, damn, I can't answer that question, and that is a challenge. Like, you know, got me on that one, because I had my little Looney Tunes, and I was, you know, because I'm a big cartoon fan, I love Bugs Bunny, all that stuff. But she hit me with that question, I was like, damn, you know. Got me. So, you know, that was the challenge. It's like, okay, we're gonna find the Black cartoons, right? You know, I'm not you're not gonna leave me hanging like that. So that started with, you know, going and sourcing that stuff from like a gallery that I had been dealing with to buy my little Bugs Bunny cells. And it was like, I need some Fat Albert, y'all need to find it. And then it's like, we need to find this. And then they got into it. And that's really how this thing started. It started as literally like a question that turned into a, you know, all right, you ain't gonna embarrass me like this. I need to answer this question. And it became a quest to go out and find it. And once you start collecting one thing, it leads to another thing. And she mentioned, like, we started going to, memorabilia shows and started, doing this. And at that point, the internet really started to take off as a means for collectors to find things. Once eBay kind of hit, I mean, honestly, and you could get like different auctions online and go to find out information about different shows. That was just it. We were just on a hunt. Like, we would find, when we found those coins at the memorabilia show, I was like, oh man, I've never seen this before. There've got to be more. And that leads to a hunt for more things. So literally we built this collection piece by piece by, starting to look for one thing and doing investigation and leading to something else and leading to something else. And, the idea of, wow, you kind of step back one day and say, wow, like she said, we've got a bunch of stuff. Like, what are we going to do with this? This is, it can sit in boxes in a warehouse, or we can do, something with it. And I think that, the idea was, let's, put it online, because that's something that's easy for us to do, right? We don't need to have, a bunch of money to do that. We can put a website up ourselves. Let's curate this and, and put it in exhibitions. That's something that we can do a lot of the work ourselves and get that out and get that done. That, doesn't require you to sign a big lease with somebody and be responsible for a physical space. So I think that was the thinking. We've had that experience already. Let's try it, try it a different way, so that we can get it up quicker, get it running, and then, kind of get our feet wet in this area, because neither one of us are, classically trained, museum people, right? We are not, classically trained. We weren't even classically trained gallery people, to be candid with you. We are definitely folks that, sometimes just step out on faith and say, hey, you know what, we've got some passion for this. Let's go out and do it and figure it out and, kind of work our way through it. I thought at that time that a museum was a little bit too much of a step for us. But, after spending 20 years in this, I think we're ready to come back and have that conversation. A, because I think we have the collection to do it. But B, because I think we have, experience under our belt dealing with museums. We've done traveling exhibitions now for a while. We've had over 300,000 people see our exhibitions. They've been very successful. So we've got experience to build on. And, I think that we really do have a good understanding of kind of what our, sweet spot is. I mean, Black culture and Black history of the 70s is really, kind of our thing. We do out of that with some of the stuff in our collection, but for the most part, we kind of focus on that. So, we've kind of grown into the Museum of Uncut Funk, right? It is significantly different than it was 10 years ago, right? And when we first started out, so we've kind of grown into it. We kind of understand what it is and where we want to take it. And we have a vision finally, I think, that makes sense for what we want to do. But it has literally been just an evolution. It's just every day, a passion and a love for Black history, a passion and a love for these artifacts. Just an excitement about like every acquisition, which I still have, right? We still have that. I just got through auction a cell that's got the 2 Black characters from C-Lab 2020. I've been looking for that for 20 years. Do you hear me? And it came, I was like, oh my God. So, it's still that excitement when you find that thing that you either haven't seen, or it's like, oh my God, we need that in our collection. And it's still that, that stepping out on faith, like, okay, you know what, I'm gonna take this money that I really shouldn't spend. And I'm gonna go get this thing, because we need it. And it's gonna complete, the story of Black characters in the animation in the 70s. So, but it literally has been, an evolution. If you asked me 10 years ago if we'd be having this conversation, sitting talking to you, like, nah, we wouldn't be here. So,
yeah. Now, so you had mentioned you mentioned that you've had over 300,000 people view your stuff. Yeah. Pam, give us an idea. I know there's a lot. Going on right now. Even during this time, you have made strides and want to get into some of that. But what have your your traveling exhibits look like? Where have they been seen? What are some of the spaces that they've been in that would not seem to be a space that I, as a Black person, would think that, you know, some of your collection would actually, you know, be seen at? Where is some of your stuff, some of your collection been?
Our first exhibition, Funky Turns 40, went to the Schomburg Center in Harlem. And it was new for them to take on an exhibition outside, if I'm not mistaken, let alone something of this nature on cartoons.
Oh.
But they took it, and it was their most successful exhibition to date that we know of, where 72,000 people came to see that show. Over 72,000 people came to see that show at the Schomburg, most of which were school children. As a matter of fact, we actually contacted the Board of Education and made them aware of the exhibition and told them that it was, you know, child friendly. And all of the student body in the city of New York came to see that exhibition.
Wow.
We went to the African American Museum, the Northwest African American Museum, excuse me. Where is that museum, Lorene? It escapes me.
Seattle.
In Seattle.
Yeah.
And they had, as Lorene has mentioned previously, all of the parents and grandparents wanted to be chaperones to go see that exhibition, Funky Turns 40, because again, it brings back memories. You know, if you're a baby boomer, you watch these cartoons like we all did, and it brings back a lot of memories for you that you can share with your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. We went to the Reading Museum, and that was, you know, a very white museum. They took our exhibition, and their audience loved it as much, just as much. So we've been in a lot of different spaces, more predominantly Black museums, but every place that we've been to, it has been a success. We've been to the DuSable Museum, a complete success in every museum. Positive feedback, a lot of positive press. We've got invited to radio stations to speak about the exhibition. So everywhere we've gone, there's been nothing but positive feedback that we've gotten. Because one, there is no other exhibition like Funky Turns, which is now 50, Funky Turns 50 on Black cartoons, or any of our other exhibitions that we have that exist. And if they do, they're not on the scale as we have done them, where we have gone to museums, presented you know, our story and what we have, and they buy into it and want to actually take it and bring it into their space. So we've been very fortunate in that respect.
Yeah, some places where we've had exhibitions that you would be like, seriously? We have a group of comic strips that appeared in the Pittsburgh Courier in the 1950s. We have the licensed rights to these comic strips. And within this color insert, first time there had ever been color comics in the Pittsburgh Courier, a whole insert of comics that had Black characters. There was one called The Chisholm Kid. So it was the first Black cowboy to ever appear in a comic strip. And that exhibition has appeared in cowboy museums across the country. I had no idea.
Wow.
But it is done extremely well. And it's been in a number of cowboy museums, believe it or not. And it was part of, you know, something out in Elko, Nevada, that was like a cowboy. I forgot the name of it.
So I've been to Elko. Elko is in the middle of nowhere. Yeah,
but
I can just say that.
But the Chisholm Kid exhibition was there. So,
my goodness,
it's something that you wouldn't expect, but a lot of interest in a story about a Black cowboy that has done extremely well. The second place that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see our exhibitions are coin exhibitions. We were at the Museum of American Finance down on Wall Street with that exhibition, as well as a couple of money museums associated with Federal Reserve banks. So those.
So you brought your collection to the Federal Reserve.
Yes. Yes. So, again, places that this is a collection of Black people on currency. So a lot of people don't know that there are actually Black people, although we didn't get our Tubmans yet, although now I'm expecting Joe Biden and Kamala to get the printing presses at the Mint going on our Tubmans. But there are Black people on currency. It is commemorative currency. So it's, commemorative coins, medals, medallions. But, the interesting part about it is all of those things are done through legislation. So you get, 2/3 of Congress that nominates a person. They vote on it. They pass a law. Sitting president signs it into law. And then you have, people from, Marian Anderson to George Washington Carver to Roy Wilkins, notable Black people who have made significant accomplishments in this country who are, forever enshrined on official objects of the U.S. government. Right. So, those things have traveled as well. So, we've been in some very interesting places. And, hope that once this whole, pandemic situation is over with, we can continue to tour, our collections to various places around the country.
That leads me into the next piece I want to explore with you. How so you primarily for this last period been an online museum, but also have had traveling exhibits while you had your online presence. This COVID situation, how has that impacted your your number of visitors to your current site? That's one. And then how has it impacted your vision or program going forward regarding what you want to do? And then we'll get into some of that. But how has this COVID thing impacted your sort of your current model and how you want to? Has it been a positive, a negative? Have you sort of had to do some things differently in terms of that?
Well, I think because we started out as a virtual museum, dealing with COVID, put our traveling exhibitions on hold.
Right.
So prior to COVID, it wasn't like every month or every other week we had traveling exhibitions. We would speak to museums. Once the interest came into place, then that's when the wheels would start turning for an exhibition to travel to a museum. So there were some periods where there weren't any exhibitions that were traveling. So you come into a situation like COVID, we were already in place having a virtual space. So making the transition from not traveling to a virtual space, there really wasn't a transition because we were already there. So this was the time for us to, take a step back and revamp and think about how we can, make some changes in our online presence to, spark more interest in what we're doing. And so that's when Lorene introduced to me the designer who created a new look for us and, put some things in our head as to what we can do, where we can go. Quite honestly, social media will probably be the death of me because it is a full-time job. And, this whole 20-year process, it's been a full-time job. But now it's like, okay, you're way past 50, and these are 2-year-olds you're competing with. And I'm sorry, there's, it's going to take a minute for me to start doing videos. It really is. But the transition, I don't think has been as bad, because it's given us the time to do things that quite honestly should have been done some time ago. So now we're actually in the process of getting them done and having a new look, and revamping the website and getting new merchandise. That has been the plus during COVID.
I'm gonna give a slightly different perspective on that, being the person who actually is responsible for those traveling exhibitions. COVID shut us down on that whole thing. And
on that front,
yeah, honestly, it did. So as that was, kind of a main revenue generator for us, it has been somewhat problematic. And candidly, Aaron, what it did is it forced us to think about, okay, there were some things that have been kind of, floating. We've talked about, starting a nonprofit for 10 years, to be honest with you. It's just been kind of hanging out there. We talked about, our exhibitions were not really designed for kids, right? This is, this is baby boomer nostalgia, right? So when we did these exhibitions, particularly the animation exhibition, and even the things that we look at from the movie poster perspective, we've always thought about it as, okay, we're folks in our 50s who grew up with this as a kid, and these exhibitions would be awesome for that audience. What we learned, based on kind of what Pam was talking about, is that they are very engaging for kids because they've never seen this stuff before. So you get kids who are looking at an animation style, they're like, what is that? I've never seen that. Like, wow, it's a cool looking thing, right? And then when they understand that, okay, I understand the significance now behind, why that's important historically, that this is the first time that you see positive Black characters. And then they go to, wow, Black people did that? Well, that's something that I could do. Like, that's a possibility. So, this is the type of feedback that we got from, the museums. And, their docents were exhausted because all of these school kids came to these, these exhibitions, and the parents and the grandparents were coming. Yeah. And we thought, that's amazing. Like, we just didn't even think about that, to be honest with you. So, what we kind of stepped back and said, there's an educational value here for school age kids that we just didn't think about. So it's always been hanging out there. We need to develop curriculum. Like, we really need to, kind of pursue this and see what we can do to make our exhibitions more kid friendly and maybe, more kids centered, student centered. And then we really need to do a more formal job of creating educational materials and building out kind of, more, hands-on opportunities, that type of thing that you would do if you started with, a student population as your target audience for your exhibition. Well, COVID has really kind of forced us to say, okay, we need to shift our focus and start working on things that we can get done that aren't totally dependent on a museum being open, right? We can develop curriculum now. Now we can, organize ourselves so that we can start to raise money to be able to do this stuff now. So that is a huge thing that got us saying, let's reshuffle the deck here. That whole nonprofit thing we've been putting off, we need to get that done, right? Because it's very clear that is really the way that you start to unlock a lot of the educational opportunities. You're able to, bring on the experts and stuff that can help you do that in a way, that honestly is, what physical brick and mortar museums do.
Right.
That we
right. Makes sense.
And not focused on because we, didn't necessarily have a space, to have kids come in and teach them. But you know what? A lot of teaching is online. Everybody's online now. Everything's digital. So the whole kind of script got, flipped on us with, kind of shutting down, the traveling exhibition to say, okay, how do we really leverage the collection? How do we leverage the educational value of it? How do we leverage some of these other things that, are on our to-do lists, but we were so busy doing this, we couldn't get to it. How do we again, kind of reshuffle the priorities and get that done? And just had a meeting today with a museum and science center, and we're talking about submitting grant applications to build what is going to be an amazing exhibition with them. And that type of stuff wouldn't have happened had it not been for COVID, to be candid with you, because we'd have kept on the path we were on.
You would have kept on the path that you were on.
We kept going where we were. But now we're like, okay, how do we adapt? How do we exist? Because we are a digital museum. How do we leverage technology to be more digital? But how do we now plan for coming out of COVID?
That's where I wanted to go. What is your thought? What is your thought on that? Given we're out here in the West Coast, so as of right now, we're in a real dicey situation out here. And New York now, and that Metroplex is in a very dicey situation with all of these different strains now that are sort of popping up in spaces that impact. But given the inflection point that we're in, but also the space, almost like a liminal space where we're not really sure as to how this thing is going to play itself out. How are you all planning for the future in the current environment? I know you mentioned the nonprofit piece. What does that look like? Are you looking still at moving ahead with envisioning a brick and mortar space again? How are you looking at merging these new things together? What's your thought on that, Pam?
Well, we have been talking about the possibilities of having a museum in a couple of municipalities, one of which would be Newark, New Jersey. However, I'd like to step back for a minute and, the way I see this playing itself out, in addition to the nonprofit and the potential of having a museum, COVID has put us in this situation where our traveling exhibitions have had to stop, and we've had to look at other things that we should have done that we're actually doing now. But our exhibitions are Black history focused. And with everything that is going on, that, we get reminded occasionally when there is another Black life that has been taken away by the hands of whomever.
Yep.
And, different groups start talking about, history, that this has happened so many years ago. Our exhibitions, our artifacts are all on Black history. And so to take all of that history and build a curriculum and start educating people in different ways, especially young people, beyond, the book, which is not a bad thing, but to have an artifact that you could actually touch or feel or look at or see something that you've never seen before, and get the history behind that, knowing that there were people like you who, one, produced this, or the person that looks like you is on this coin and here's why. Those stories need to be told. And, they can be told in so many different ways. And with all of the artifacts that we have, I think it positions us in a way that is so uniquely different from any other type of cultural institution and or museum, because they don't have the artifacts that we have. Now, granted, some of the producers of these artifacts were not people of color. However, it's the stories with that they produced that talk about the first astronaut, the first spy, the first cowboy, the first Black animator who created this cartoon that came out on such and such date with all of these Black characters. So there are stories there that haven't been told that can give a young person or anyone put them on a path of, oh, well, I can do this. I could actually be a designer of coins in the US Mint because
Yeah.
so-and-so created this coin that has this Black person on that did all of this history to be acknowledged by the United States government.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, in addition to everything else that Lorene has said, we are uniquely positioned that if we ever get out of this COVID bubble, we have, again, another story to tell, but on a different level. And this is why it's important. And here is everything that we have to show you what we can do with it. And if we're still in the COVID bubble, children still have to learn. They're
Yep.
still being educated. And, you know, states are starting to implement Black history legislation that, okay, we're not just saying you have to teach it, you have to teach it.
Yep.
Yeah, it has become law now. Now, some states have had it on the books as law and they've done a lousy job in implementing it. But now with the constant, you know, in your face news about this person and that person and this person. And you know what? We can't, people are not letting up to let others know of our frustration. And with that said, again, I think we're uniquely positioned with the artifacts to tell those stories from an educational perspective.
Yeah, our path forward is to, you know, to continue to leverage the educational value of our collection, to build out, you know, educational opportunities that are both, you know, digital, things that can be done online, can be done virtually, which is, you know, kind of a new area for us, as well as to prepare for, you know, once we get past this COVID situation, to, you know, continue to advocate for Black history and the importance of learning Black history. We've got a, you know, campaign called Tell the Truth, Teach the Truth, which is all about, you know, really getting a movement behind federal legislation that mandates that Black history be taught in schools from pre-K through 12, and that the people who develop the materials are Black. Okay, so no more of these, you know, you know, politically negotiated textbooks that don't tell the truth. The hard history needs to be taught. Slavery, white supremacy, white supremacist violence, it has to be taught, because everybody needs to understand what our experience in this country has been. Critically important that Black children understand that, because, you know, you have to know where you've been to know where you're going, right? But everybody needs to learn this history because we're still living it. It, you know, in order for us to heal and to, you know, to move forward as a nation, everybody needs to understand what has happened and understands, you know, why we, you know, we're talking about Black Lives Matter, why all that stuff is going down the way it is, because, well, things have changed, not enough has changed, and we're tired and we're sick of it. So it's get the history out, get everybody speaking the same language, we're on the same page so we can move forward and make change. So we will continue to advocate for that. And then we absolutely, positively will be building a museum of uncut funk. It will be different than any other museum on the planet. It will be, I want you to think Soul Train meets Disneyland, because that's what we're talking about. It's going to be the funkiest experience in the universe. And, you know, we're going to bring it like a museum called the Museum of Uncut Funk would bring it. Exactly what you would expect it to be, but it's going to be a lot funkier than that. So we are working towards that. We are excited about it. We, you know, have started our nonprofit journey, and we will, you know, get that whole process going. And, you know, we just intend to make the most of this situation, right? You know, we're forced to step back and kind of rethink our future, which we have done. And we can't wait. We're coming out with all kinds of interesting things, and, you know, we'll be you know, we will be out there doing our thing. That's all I can tell you. Just, you know, just wait, it's coming.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to see that. I got one last thing. So where can we find the Museum of Uncut Funk?
MuseumofUncutFunk.com. We are also on Twitter at Sister2Funky. We are on Facebook, Museum of Uncut Funk. and we are on IG Museum of Uncut Funk.
All right. So museumofuncutfunk.com.
That's it.
Twitter, Insta, all of the places
You can get all of that
that,
on our website. Yep.
that one would go. Hey, everybody, I want to thank Pam Thomas, Lorene Williamson for showing up and giving us a review in our indie spotlight for the Museum of Uncut Funk. Thank you for not only it's not just it's something that is needed for our generations now and to come, to know what we as African Americans, as Black people, have done in a space that no one was able to think of except for two geniuses that I'm sitting right here with on video. So thank you all for coming. And again, for everyone out there, I want my museum uncut.
Absolutely.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.